The morning Roscoe Maddox rode onto the Langley spread. The sky above the Texas panhandle was the kind of blue that made a man believe the world could still be generous. And he had no idea that the woman standing in the middle of that sun-bleached yard was about to rearrange every plan he had ever made for his life. He had ridden 3 days from Amarillo on the back of a big roan gelding named Copper, a horse that had carried him through thunderstorms and drought-cracked flats without complaint. His employer, a rancher by the name of Gerald Holt, had sent him south with a simple directive: find the Langley cattle, assess their condition, negotiate a fair price, and bring them north to fill out Holt's expanding herd before the fall drives began. Roscoe was 31 years old and had been working cattle trades for Holt going on 6 years. He was good at it. He knew beef on the hoof the way a preacher knew scripture instinctively, deeply, without needing to think too hard about it. The job was supposed to take no more than 4 days there and back. Simple arithmetic, nothing more. But nothing about Fannie Langley was simple. She was standing near the fence of the main holding pen when he first saw her, one boot propped on the lowest rail, both forearms resting on the top board, staring out at a small cluster of longhorns with an expression that was equal parts love and exhaustion. She wore a pair of canvas trousers tucked into worn boots, a plain cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows, and a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on her head so the morning light hit her face fully. Her hair was dark and pinned up loosely, with several strands having given up the fight and falling against her neck. She looked like the land had made her weathered just enough to be interesting, strong in a way that had nothing to do with performance. Roscoe pulled Copper to a stop about 30 yards out and took in the scene before making himself known, the way a person does when they sense they are about to walk into something that requires attention. There was a boy of about 12 or 13 doing work near the barn, stacking feed sacks. A pair of older ranch hands were moving cattle through a far gate. The whole operation looked lean, not desperate but lean, the kind of lean that comes from doing everything correctly with just barely enough. He nudged Copper forward and called out as he approached, "Morning, I am looking for the Langley ranch." The woman at the fence turned, and she looked at him with a frank and unhurried gaze that told him immediately she was not in the habit of being caught off guard. Her eyes were a shade of brown that reminded him of good creek water, warm, with depth in it. "You found it," she said. "I am Fannie Langley. And you are riding across my best grazing grass, so I would appreciate it if you angled that horse toward the road there before you flatten another square foot of it." He blinked, then steered Copper sideways toward the dirt path she was indicating with a small nod of her chin. "My apologies, ma'am. I am Roscoe Maddox. I ride for Gerald Holt out of Amarillo. He sent me down to inquire about purchasing your cattle." Something moved through her expression, too quick for him to read. She took her boot off the fence rail and stood to her full height, which was not particularly tall but carried itself like something much bigger. "I know why you are here," she said. "Mr. Holt sent a letter 2 weeks ago. I have been expecting somebody." "He should have sent word of the specific date," Roscoe said. "I am sorry if my arrival is inconvenient." "Nothing about this business is convenient," she said, but not unkindly. "Come down off your horse and I will put some coffee on. We can talk it over properly. My foreman, Dell, can see to your animal." He dismounted and handed Copper's reins to the older ranch hand who had drifted over from the far gate. The man introduced himself as Dell Pryor, shook Roscoe's hand with a firm and calloused grip, and said nothing beyond the bare minimum, which Roscoe appreciated. He followed Fannie Langley across the yard toward the house, a well-built but modest structure with a deep covered porch, and a kitchen garden along the south side that looked like it was fighting the drought with grim determination. Inside, the house was clean and organized in the way that a person keeps a place when they have too much to do and not enough help, every surface doing double duty, nothing wasted. There were drawings tacked to the wall near the table, childish but earnest, horses and cattle, and what appeared to be a very ambitious attempt at a sunset. Fannie caught him looking at them. "My son Tommy," she said. "He is 12. He considers himself quite the artist." He has got a good eye for horses, Roscoe said honestly. She moved to the stove and began building up the fire with practiced efficiency. He settled into a chair at the kitchen table without being invited, because the way she moved through the room made him feel like standing on ceremony would be an insult. "How many head are we talking about?" he asked, pulling out the small leather notebook he carried in his breast pocket. 73 head of longhorns," she said, not looking up from the stove. "All healthy. Most of them are 3- and 4-year-olds. I have got 6 breeding cows I am keeping back. The rest are what I am selling." Mr. Holt's letter mentioned he was interested in up to 80 head. "You said 73, that all you have, or is there another pasture?" She turned and looked at him, and this time there was something in her eyes that was not quite guard but was close to it. "That is all I am selling," she said. "The 6 breeding cows and 2 bulls are not part of the transaction." "Fair enough," he said. "Can I get a look at them today?" "That is why you are here," she said, and set 2 tin mugs on the table with a small thud that was not quite impatience but was the cousin of it. He spent the rest of that morning walking the pastures with Del Pryor, who turned out to be a quiet and efficient man of about 55 with a gray mustache and eyes that had been watching cattle so long they could not really look at anything else. The herd was in good condition, better than good actually. Fannie Langley ran a tight, clean operation. The cattle were well fed, calm, and had the kind of solid bone structure that told Roscoe they had been selectively managed over years with someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "She does most of the management herself," Del said at one point, answering a question Roscoe had not quite asked. "Her husband, Robert Langley, he died 2 winters back. Fever took him in January of 1882. She has been running the whole thing herself since, with me and Clarence over there helping." It was now the summer of 1883, Roscoe noted. A little over a year and a half since she had lost her husband, and she was out here managing a herd of 73 longhorns in the Texas Panhandle while raising a 12-year-old boy. He said nothing about this to Del, but he kept the information somewhere in the back of his mind. When he returned to the yard at midday, Fannie was coming out of the barn with a bucket of water, and she stopped when she saw him. "Well?" she asked. "They are excellent animals," he said. "Holt authorized me to offer $9 a head. Given the quality of what you have, I think we can come to a good agreement." She studied him for a long moment, the bucket hanging from her hand without any apparent strain. "I want $11 a head for the lot," she said, "and I want it paid in full before the cattle leave this property." He ran the numbers. 73 head at $11 was $803. Holt had authorized him to go as high as $10.50, and Roscoe had the discretion to stretch it a little if the quality warranted it. It warranted it. "$9.50, he said. "10.5, she said without blinking. $10 even, he said. "That is my final offer, and it is a fair one." She looked at him steadily, and he had the strange sensation of being weighed and measured by someone who was very good at it and did not especially care about your comfort while they were doing it. 10.25, she said. He almost smiled. "Done," he said. She set the bucket down and held out her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm and brief, all business, and she let go quickly. "I will need 2 days to sort the ones I am keeping and get the others ready to move," she said. "You are welcome to stay. I have a spare room. It is basic, but it is clean." "I appreciate that," he said. "I would not want to put you out." "You are not putting me out," she said flatly. "It is practical. You need to be here to verify the count before you take them north, and 2 days of boarding is easier than you riding back and forth. Del's wife, Clara, helps with meals." It was the most practical thing he had ever heard a person say about hospitality. He appreciated it so much that he did not know what to do with the feeling, so he just nodded and said he would need to send word to Holt about the delay, and she told him there was a telegraph station in the town of Brixton about 6 miles east, and that Tommy could ride a message there in the morning if he had something to send. That first evening, supper was a quiet affair. Del and his wife Clara, a warm and round-faced woman who moved around the kitchen like she had been born in it, served up a meal of salt pork and dried beans with cornbread and a pot of strong coffee. Tommy sat across from Roscoe and stared at him with the frank curiosity of a 12-year-old who had not yet learned that staring was considered impolite. "Are you a real cattle trader?" Tommy asked. "Tommy," Fannie said, in a tone that was not sharp but had weight to it. "It is all right," Roscoe said. "Yes, I am. I work for a man named Gerald Holt who has a big ranch up near Amarillo. I help him buy and sell cattle. Do you ride on long drives?" "I have, not so much lately. The drives are getting shorter as the railheads push south. In a few more years they may not be what they used to be." Tommy seemed to consider the end of an era with the philosophical acceptance that only someone who had never experienced it could manage. "Ma says the railroad will come through Brixton eventually," he said. "Your mother is probably right," Roscoe said, and glanced at Fannie, who was eating her supper with the focused attention of someone who did not take meals for granted. "I sent for that railroad survey information 6 months ago," she said, looking up briefly. "The line from the eastern route will likely pass within 40 miles of here within the next 2 to 3 years. It will change everything about how we move cattle. It already has in some places," Roscoe said. "It cuts the drive time considerably, and the cattle arrive in better condition. Less weight loss on the trail," she said with a small nod. "Less risk of stampede and weather losses." "Exactly." She looked at him again with that measuring quality, and this time it was accompanied by a flicker of something that was not quite warmth but was not quite neutrality either. It was the look of someone who had met very few people they considered worth talking to about something real, and was reassessing. After supper, while Clara cleared the table and Tommy went to do his evening chores, Roscoe sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sky do what the Texas sky does in the summer evenings, pull out every shade of gold and orange, and lay them across the flat horizon like a tablecloth being spread. It was a sky that demanded you stop what you were doing and acknowledge it. Fannie came out and stood at the porch rail, and for a while neither of them spoke. The quiet between them was not uncomfortable. It was the easy quiet of two people who were both more accustomed to their own company than to conversation and had found, somewhat to their surprise, that they did not mind the company of the other. "You grew up on ranches?" she asked eventually. "Missouri originally," he said. "My family had a small farm. I drifted west when I was 18, worked cattle all across Kansas and then Texas, found I was better at the trading end than the ranching end." "Why is that, do you think?" He considered the question honestly, which was not something he usually did when someone asked about his history. "I think because ranching asks you to stay in one place and put down roots, and for a long time I did not know where those roots belonged." She turned her head and looked at him sideways. "And now I am 31 and I am starting to wonder if I waited too long to figure it out," he said, and then felt slightly embarrassed by the candor of it, which was unlike him. She turned back to the horizon. "Robert, my husband, he was born on this land," she said, and there was tenderness in her voice alongside something that had been worn smooth by time, the way grief goes when it has been lived with long enough to become part of the furniture. "His father homesteaded this section in 1863. Robert always said the land was in his blood. I used to think that was just something people said. And now," she was quiet for a moment, "now I think I understand it. This land is in Tommy's blood too. I can see it in the way he looks at it. And I think it got into my blood somewhere along the way, even though I was born in Illinois and I came here as a bride and thought Texas was the most inhospitable place I had ever seen." "When did you stop thinking that?" She smiled, and it was the first real smile he had seen from her, not a polite expression or a functional acknowledgement, but something genuine and a little surprised by itself. "About 3 weeks after I arrived," she said. "I went out one evening to call the horses in, and I walked over that rise to the north, and I saw the light on the grass and the whole sky open up like that, and I thought, oh, I understand now." He did not say anything to that, because there was nothing to say that would have improved it. The second day was full of work. Roscoe rode out with Dell to help sort the cattle, cutting the breeding stock away from the sale herd with the methodical patience that the job required. It took most of the morning. Fannie worked alongside them without ceremony, cutting through the herd on a compact gray mare she rode with easy expertise, reading the cattle's movements the way a person reads a familiar book quickly, picking up exactly where they needed to be. Roscoe watched her work when he thought she was not looking, and sometimes when she clearly was but did not seem to mind. She was efficient and calm with the cattle, never rough, never dramatic. She had the kind of authority over animals that comes not from force but from absolute confidence, and the cattle seemed to know it and responded accordingly. At one point, a young steer broke out of the group and bolted back toward the far end of the pasture, and Fannie was on her gray mare and after it before Dell had finished turning his horse. She brought it back around in a wide arc, calm and unhurried, and pushed it back into the sorting pen without anything that could be called excitement. Just competence, clean and pure. She is something, Dell said quietly, appearing beside Roscoe. She is, Roscoe agreed before he could think better of it. Dell looked at him with the knowing expression of a man who had been watching people for 55 years and missed very little. He said nothing more about it. That afternoon, while the cattle were settled in the holding pen and the count was done and verified 67 head, after Fannie had kept back 6 that she had decided at the last moment she needed to hold, Roscoe sat at the kitchen table and wrote out the bill of sale. The negotiated price had been $10.25 per head. 67 head came to $686.75. He had the money in a cash pouch in his saddlebag, brought specifically for the purpose. He counted it out on the table in front of her, a mixture of paper currency and coin that she received without theatrical display, counting it herself with quiet efficiency, then folding it and putting it in a tin box that lived on the kitchen shelf between a small Bible and a well-worn almanac. "Everything is in order," she said. "It is," he said. He should have left then. The deal was done. The cattle would be moved north in the morning. His job was complete. He had accomplished exactly what Gerald Holt had sent him to do. He looked at his notebook, at the bill of sale he had just written, at the small tin box on the shelf where Fannie had put nearly $700 that would keep this ranch solvent through the next season and probably the one after that. Everything was resolved. Everything was finished. He looked at Fannie Langley, who was standing at the kitchen counter with her back to him, writing something in a ledger with careful and deliberate strokes, and he did not want to leave. The thought arrived in him not as a dramatic revelation, but as a simple and implacable fact, the way a man realizes he is hungry or cold, not with excitement, but with the settled recognition that something is true and will have to be dealt with. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the back of her neck and the set of her shoulders and the way she held her pen, and he understood clearly that he was in some amount of trouble that he was not going to be able to ride away from by morning. He stayed for supper. He told himself it was because the cattle would need to be loaded and sorted for the drive first thing in the morning, and it was practical to be on the premises. He told himself this with the earnest conviction of a man who knows he is lying to himself, but is not ready to stop. Clara made a supper of pan-fried salt pork and boiled greens and another round of cornbread, and Tommy talked about a horse he had been training from a colt, a bay quarter horse he had named Biscuit, which he seemed to find an endlessly amusing choice of name. Roscoe asked about the horse's temperament and training progress, and Tommy's face lit up with the particular radiance that 12-year-olds have when an adult takes their interest seriously. "He is coming along well," Tommy said. "Ma says I can start working cattle on him by next spring if his training holds." "Quarter horses are good cattle horses," Roscoe said, "quick on their feet, good instincts." "Did you ever train a horse from a foal?" Tommy asked. "Once. A little paint filly in Kansas. It is slow work but satisfying." "What did you name her?" "I called her Tuesday," Roscoe said, "because that is the day she was born and I was not feeling particularly creative." Tommy laughed, a full and unself-conscious laugh, and Fannie looked up from her plate with an expression that Roscoe felt somewhere in the center of his chest. It was the expression of a mother watching her child be happy. It was unguarded and full of a love so complete and uncomplicated that it made him ache with something he could not immediately name. After supper, the same ritual: Tommy to his chores, Clara to clean up, Dell off to his bunkhouse room at the back of the barn. Roscoe and Fannie on the porch with coffee, watching the evening come in. The sky was doing something extraordinary again. It seemed to him that the sky over this stretch of Texas made a point of being extraordinary every evening, as if it knew it was being watched. "You should have the cattle to the Holt Ranch in 4 days if the weather holds," Fannie said. "About that," he agreed. "Dell has been good enough to offer to ride the first day with us to see them settled on the trail." "I know, I asked him to." She paused. "The cattle are important to this ranch, not the ones being sold, the ones I kept. But these animals too, because the money from them is what lets me keep the breeding stock and operate through next year. I want them to arrive well." "I will take good care of them," he said. "I know you will," she said, and the simplicity of her trust in him did something to his chest that no woman's trust had done before, possibly because it was so free of artifice. She was not trying to flatter him or persuade him. She simply believed what she had observed about him and said so. He looked at his coffee cup. "Can I ask you something?" "You can try," she said. "How long do you intend to run this ranch alone?" The question was forward and he knew it, but the evening and the ease between them had lowered his usual caution more than he had realized. She was quiet for a moment. "I do not think of it as running it alone," she said. "Dell is here. Clara is here. Tommy is getting old enough to be real help. And there are good people in Brixton, neighbors who help when it is needed, and I try to help in return." She paused. "I think you mean something more specific by the question." "I suppose I do," he said. "Then say the specific thing." He looked at her. She was looking at the horizon, her profile clean against the darkening sky, her coffee cup held in both hands. She was 28 years old. He had gathered this from various things Dell and Clara had said, and she had the quality of someone who had been tested by real things and had come through not unscathed but unbroken, which is a much more interesting and admirable outcome. "I am wondering if you are lonely," he said. She turned and looked at him then, and the look was not offended or flustered. It was direct and honest in the way she seemed to do everything. "Sometimes," she said. "Not often. There is too much to do for loneliness to get much purchase. But sometimes, yes. I ask because I find myself sitting on your porch not wanting to get up," he said. "And that is unusual for me." Something shifted in her expression. Not dramatically, nothing Fannie Langley did was dramatic in the theatrical sense, but something moved behind her eyes, a door opening a small, careful amount. "You are a man who likes to keep moving," she said. "I have been," he said. "I am not sure anymore that I like it as much as I thought I did." She looked at him for another long moment, that measuring quality in her eyes, but this time mixed with something else. Something that was making its own cautious assessment. "You had better get some sleep," she said finally. "You have a long ride tomorrow." And he did go inside, and he did sleep, and he was up before dawn helping Dell and Roscoe's own horse, Copper, get ready for the drive north. But first, in the gray light before the sun was properly up, he stood in the kitchen while Fannie put together provisions for the trail, wrapped bread and dried meat, and a tin of salt and a small bag of coffee beans. And he watched her work and understood that something was happening to him that could not be undone by simply riding away. He tried, though. He drove the 67 head north with 2 of Holt's men who had ridden down to meet him, as had been the arrangement. Dell turned back after the first full day of travel, just as he had said he would. Roscoe rode north across the flat golden expanse of the Panhandle, with the cattle moving in their unhurried herd around him, and he thought about Fannie Langley with the persistent and somewhat irritating intensity of a man who is trying to think about other things. He thought about the way she had shaken his hand on the deal. He thought about the smile she had given him when he said something about Tuesday, the horse that made Tommy laugh. He thought about the tin box on the kitchen shelf and the careful way she had written in her ledger, and the drawings Tommy had tacked on the wall, and the kitchen garden fighting the drought outside the south window. He thought about the evening sky above her porch and the way she had said, without any performance at all, that she was sometimes lonely. He arrived at the Holt Ranch outside Amarillo on the fourth day as expected, the cattle in excellent condition. Gerald Holt was a heavy-set and efficient man of about 50 who was pleased with the purchase and said so. He reviewed the bill of sale, confirmed the count, and authorized payment of Roscoe's fee for the transaction. It was a good outcome by every measurable standard. Roscoe sat in the bunkhouse that evening and stared at the wall and thought about what he was going to do next. He told Holt the following morning that he would be taking some time away from regular work. He had some personal business to attend to south of Amarillo. Holt looked at him with the pragmatic curiosity of a man who has employed someone long enough to notice when something has changed about them. Is this the kind of personal business that costs money or the kind that makes a man better company? He asked. I am honestly not sure yet, Roscoe said. Holt nodded as if this was a perfectly satisfactory answer. You have been a reliable man for 6 years, he said. Take your time. There will be work for you when you are ready. There is always work. Roscoe left Amarillo the next morning on Copper pointed south. He had a plan that was simple and nervous and entirely unlike his usual approach to anything, which was to have all variables assessed and accounted for before committing. He was going back to the Langley ranch. He was going to arrive at the front gate and ask Fannie Langley if she would be willing to let him stay on as a hired hand for a while, or at minimum, if she would be willing to have a conversation with him about whether there was any possibility that what he had felt sitting on her porch those 2 evenings was something that existed on both sides of the equation. He had been alone for a long time. He had not thought much about it. But now he thought about it with the clarity of a man who has been given a brief view of something different and cannot unsee it. He arrived at the Langley Ranch on a Tuesday afternoon, and the coincidence of the day did not escape him with the sky doing its usual magnificent work overhead and the whole flat landscape shimmering in the summer heat. He rode up the road this time, well clear of the grazing grass. Fannie was in the kitchen garden, crouched down between the rows of beans, wearing her canvas trousers and a blue shirt, pulling weeds with the focused attention she brought to everything. She heard Copper's hoofbeats and stood up and turned, and when she saw who it was, something moved across her face that she did not quite manage to hold back in time. It was something quick and bright, and even though it settled almost immediately into her usual composure, he had seen it, and it changed everything about his confidence in this endeavor. Mr. Maddox, she said. Mrs. Langley, he said, and took his hat off, which he had not done when he first arrived a week ago because he had been in professional mode and had not thought about it. I know this is unexpected. It is, she agreed, brushing soil from her hands onto her trousers. The cattle arrived safely, all 67 in good condition. Holt was pleased. I am glad to hear it, she said. Is that why you rode 3 days south? No, he said, a pause. The garden smelled of warm earth and something herbal, and a blue-tailed lizard ran across the path between them with great urgency, apparently late for an appointment. I rode back because I did not want to leave in the first place, he said, and I would like to know if that means anything to you, or if I have made a long ride based on a misreading of the situation. Fannie Langley looked at him for what felt like a significant portion of his adult life, and then she said, You had better put your horse in the corral and come inside. Clara just made coffee. He let out a breath that he had not realized he had been holding for approximately 3 days and swung down off Copper. Thank you, he said. Do not thank me yet, she said, but there was something in her voice that was not quite a smile but was close enough to make him feel that the ride south had been among the better decisions of his 31 years. They sat at the kitchen table with coffee, just the two of them, Clara tactfully finding reasons to be in the other room, and Fannie looked at him across the table with those warm Creekwater eyes and said, "Tell me what you actually want, Roscoe. Not what is practical or sensible. What do you want?" The use of his first name was the first time she had used it, and it landed on him like a warm hand. "I want to stay," he said. "I want to see if what I felt here, that ease, that sense of being somewhere real, I want to see if that builds into something. With you, I am not asking you to commit to anything. I'm asking if I may stay for a while, work your ranch if you need the hands, and see what happens between us honestly." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I have a son," she said. "I know. This ranch is his inheritance. Everything I do is in service of that. I understand that. I have no interest in a man who will be charming and then leave," she said, and her voice was steady and careful, and told him that this was not a hypothetical concern but one with history behind it, though he did not know whose history. "I have never been particularly charming," he said. "I am more reliable than charming. I am told it is a dull distinction but a useful one." Her expression broke into that real smile, the one that surprised itself, and she looked down at her coffee cup as if she needed to compose herself, which struck him as the most endearing thing he had ever seen. "Dell can use another pair of hands," she said at last. "The summer work is heavy and Clarence has been struggling with his knee. You can have the spare room and your keep in exchange for work. We can see what happens honestly." She said the last phrase back to him with a deliberateness that told him she had heard every word he said and was agreeing to more than the practical arrangement. "That suits me," he said. Tommy came in from outside about 10 minutes later and stopped cold in the doorway when he saw Roscoe. Then his face broke into an enormous grin. "You came back," he said, with the uncomplicated delight of a 12-year-old who has no reason yet to be suspicious of good fortune. "I did," Roscoe said. "Are you going to help with Biscuit?" "Tommy," Fannie said. "I would be glad to," Roscoe said, "if your mother does not mind." "As long as the cattle work gets done first," Fannie said firmly, but she was looking at her son's happy face when she said it, and the expression on her own face was something Roscoe decided to store carefully, like a piece of good news you keep in your pocket for when things are hard. The days that followed had a rhythm to them that settled into Roscoe's bones with a naturalness that surprised him. He was up before dawn, worked alongside Dell through the morning mending fence line, managing the small herd Fannie had kept, bringing in the second cutting of the kitchen garden, hauling water when the summer bore down with its full and merciless weight. He was not unused to hard work, but there was a difference between working for wages and working for something that felt like it belonged to you, and even though this was not his land and he had been there for less than 2 weeks, the quality of the work had already changed into something that sat differently in his hands and his back. Fannie worked harder than any of them. He had expected this, based on what he had observed during the cattle deal, but knowing it and watching it daily were different things. She was out before he was most mornings, and she was the last one to go in at night. She kept books on the ranch operation that would have impressed a banker, noting every expenditure and income with precise handwriting in a series of ledgers she kept in a wooden box under the bed. She corresponded regularly with the county land office, with a seed supplier in Fort Worth, and with 2 neighboring ranches whose owners she traded labor and equipment with during heavy seasons. She had turned down a marriage proposal from a rancher in Brixton named Luther Cates. He learned from Clara, who was the kind of woman who considered sharing relevant information to be an act of friendship. Luther Cates was a prosperous man with a decent reputation who had made the proposal approximately 6 months after Robert Langley's death, which Clara thought was about 6 months too soon, and Fannie had agreed, though she had been polite about it. "Has he asked again?" Roscoe asked, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "Twice," Clara said without inflection. "Last time was in the spring." She told him she was not interested in marriage to someone whose primary interest was in acquiring adjacent land. Roscoe felt that this was a reasonable objection. He learned other things about Fannie in the way you learn things about a person when you are around them through the full range of a day. That she read in the evenings when she could, mostly practical books, but also novels occasionally, which she seemed faintly embarrassed about until she mentioned a particularly gripping one, and then did not seem embarrassed at all. That she had strong opinions about the management of water rights in the county, having attended 3 county meetings on the subject, and could speak at length about the various competing claims and why the current system was inadequate. That she had a dry and precise sense of humor that she deployed rarely and with excellent aim, usually when she was tired. That she was patient with Tommy in the specific and thoughtful way of a parent who understands the difference between patience and permissiveness. He also learned that she watched him. He caught her at it several times, not with obvious attention, but with the sidelong observation of a person who is gathering data and being careful about it. He did not mind. He was doing the same thing. 3 weeks into his stay, something happened that changed the temperature between them. There had been a problem with the north fence line, where a stretch of posts had been undermined by erosion along a creek bed, and several of the rails had come down. A dozen of the cattle had gotten through and wandered a fair distance onto the neighboring property, which belonged to a man named Silas Drum, who was not known for his generosity of spirit, and had a long-standing and poorly disguised intention to expand his landholdings in ways that sometimes involved making adjacent landowners uncomfortable. Dell discovered the breach early in the morning and came to report it, and Roscoe was already saddled before the full extent of the problem was explained. He rode out to find the cattle, knowing the approximate direction from Dell's account, and spent 2 hours in the early morning heat working through Drum's east pasture gathering the strays back toward the breach. He was pushing the last of them through when he encountered Silas Drum himself, riding in from the south on a big dark horse, accompanied by 2 hands. Drum was a thick-necked man of about 55 with the sun-reddened face of someone who spent a great deal of time outdoors being angry. He pulled up his horse 15 yards from Roscoe with a posture that was designed to communicate ownership and authority. "Those cattle were on my land," Drum said. "Fence came down overnight," Roscoe said, keeping his voice level. "I am returning them. My apologies for the intrusion." "Your apologies," Drum said, tasting the word like it was unfamiliar. "And who are you to be offering apologies for Langley cattle?" "My name is Roscoe Maddox. I am working for Mrs. Langley." "Working for her," Drum repeated, and the way he said it suggested a meaning he did not bother to specify, which was the kind of cowardice Roscoe found more contemptible than open rudeness. He kept his expression neutral. "I am a ranch hand," Roscoe said. "The fence will be repaired today. If any damage was done to your pasture or your own animals, Mrs. Langley will want to know about it so she can make it right." Drum looked at him for a long moment, then looked at the cattle now moving back through the gap toward Langley land. "You tell Fannie Langley," he said, dropping the courtesy title with the casualness of someone who thinks he has earned the right to it, "that fence lines on the north section have been questionable for years, and it might be time she considered what this operation is costing her." "I will let her know you said hello," Roscoe said, and turned his horse and followed the cattle through. When he reported the encounter to Fannie that morning, her jaw tightened in a way that told him this was not the first time Drum had found an angle to suggest that her operation was unsustainable. "He has been making comments like that since Robert died," she said. "He offered to buy the north section twice. Both times I told him it was not for sale." "What does he want with your north section specifically?" "Water access," she said. "There is a spring on the north section that never goes dry, even in bad drought years. Drum's east pasture goes dry by August most years. He wants that spring." "He is not going to get it from you," Roscoe said. She looked at him, and something in the steadiness of his statement seemed to reach her. "No," she said, "he is not." Roscoe spent the rest of that day repairing the north fence line with Dell and Tommy, who had come along to help on a Saturday when there was no school in session. They replaced 12 posts and 3 full lengths of rail, and by evening the line was solid and better than it had been before the breach. Roscoe inspected it twice before he was satisfied. Walking back toward the ranch house in the last light, Tommy fell into step beside him, leading his quarter-horse Biscuit, who had been tied nearby during the work and had spent the day developing what appeared to be a philosophical perspective on fence building. "Mr. Maddox," Tommy said, in the tone of someone who has been working up to something. "Roscoe," Roscoe said. He had asked Tommy to call him by his first name after the first week. "Roscoe," Tommy said, and then was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to stay? Not just for the summer, I mean." Roscoe looked at him. Tommy was looking straight ahead at the path, with the careful unconcern of a 12-year-old who has put a very large question into the air and is now pretending not to be intensely invested in the answer. "I hope to," Roscoe said honestly. "I would like to, but there are other people who need to have a say in that." Tommy nodded, still looking ahead. "Ma likes you," he said. "She argues with you, which means she takes you seriously. She does not argue with people she does not respect." Roscoe turned this over in his mind. "I will take that as encouragement," he said. Tommy glanced at him sideways with an expression of satisfaction that he immediately tried to make look casual. "Biscuit is doing well on the cutting work," he said, with the air of a subject changer, and Roscoe obliged. That evening, after supper, Fannie brought out a bottle of apple brandy that she kept on the high shelf, which Clara said only came out on occasions of significance or after particularly difficult days. The fence repair apparently qualified. Dell and Clara joined them on the porch for a single cup each, then departed with the good grace of people who understand atmosphere, and Roscoe and Fannie were left alone in the warm summer dark with their cups and the sound of the night coming alive around them. "Thank you for how you handled Drum this morning," Fannie said. "I did not do anything remarkable," he said. "You were calm and firm, and you did not give him anything to escalate with," she said. "That is more remarkable than it sounds with Sela's Drum. He is a man who feeds on other people's anxiety." "I have known men like that," Roscoe said. "They are usually more afraid than they appear." "Robert used to say that," she said. She was quiet for a moment, and he let the quiet stand. "I do not bring him up to make you uncomfortable," she added. "I just sometimes things sound like things he said, and I notice it." "You should not have to be careful about that with me," Roscoe said. "He was your husband and Tommy's father and the man who built this place with his family. That does not diminish, and I would not ask it to." She looked at him then, and the door that had opened a careful fraction 3 weeks ago was noticeably wider now, the light from behind it different. "You are a good man, Roscoe Maddox," she said. "I am trying to be," he said. "I was not always." "What were you before?" "Just absent," he said. "Not bad, just not present anywhere, just riding through." She considered this. "And now you are present." "Right now I am very present," he said, and looked at her directly, and she looked back without looking away, and for a moment the whole plain of the Texas Panhandle seemed to hold its breath. "I am not going to rush into anything," she said, but her voice was soft. "I know," he said. "I am not asking you to." "I need to know that you are serious," she said. "Not about today or this summer. About the kind of serious that a woman with a child and a ranch and a life built here needs a person to be." "I understand what you are asking," he said. "I cannot promise you the future because nobody can. But I can tell you that I have not felt this way about a place or a person since I was young enough that feeling things came easy and I did not question it, and at my age that means something." She looked at him steadily for a long time. Then she reached over and put her hand over his where it rested on the arm of the chair, just briefly, just the weight and warmth of her hand, and then she took it away and looked back at the dark. "All right," she said quietly. "All right." September came in hot and then cooled suddenly. The way the season sometimes turns in the Panhandle, with the abruptness of a mind, changed all at once. The ranch work shifted with the season, the kitchen garden brought in and stored, the hay cut and stacked, the cattle shifted to different pastures as the grass changed. Roscoe had grown into the work the way a person grows into a coat that fits, not perfectly at first, with some adjustment required, but increasingly and then completely. He and Fannie fell into a habit of evenings on the porch. sometimes talking, sometimes reading, sometimes in a comfortable silence that was more intimate than many conversations he had experienced. They talked about everything: the state of cattle prices, the question of water rights, Tommy's progress in school, the books she was reading, the places he had been before he came south, the nature of the ranch and where it was headed. They talked about grief. Once, late on a September evening when the air had turned cool and they were close together on the bench under the porch roof with a lamp burning between them. She told him about Robert's illness, the fever that had come on in the winter of 1882 and progressed quickly, the doctor riding from Brixton and being unable to do very much, the 10 days of watching and hoping, and then the simple, terrible ending. She told it without dramatic weight in her straightforward way, but her voice was different in the telling, softer, and he sat with her in it without trying to improve or deflect it. He told her about his own losses, his mother, dead when he was 16, which had been the thing that sent him west because there was nothing left to hold him to Missouri. A friend named Cal who had died of a snakebite in Kansas when Roscoe was 23. Which was the kind of death that seemed too arbitrary to make sense of, and so you just carried it. She listened to both of these with the same complete and unhurried attention she gave everything, and when he finished she said, "I think loneliness is cumulative," and he thought it was the most accurate thing anyone had ever said about the specific ache he had carried for years without a name for it. He reached over and took her hand the way she had taken his on the porch weeks before, just briefly, just the acknowledgement of it, and she let him hold it for a moment before she squeezed his fingers gently and let go, and they both looked out at the dark and said nothing more, because nothing more needed to be said. October brought cooler weather and a problem that was not Dell's knee, which had been a recurring obstacle, but Sela's drum, who had apparently decided that the subtlety of his previous approaches was no longer serving him. He showed up at the Langley ranch gate one morning with two of his hands, and a surveyor whose instruments and posture both suggested he would rather be anywhere else, and announced that he had reason to believe the placement of the boundary marker on the north section was incorrect, and he intended to have it verified. Fannie came out of the house and stood at the gate with the absolute composure of a woman who has been expecting this particular maneuver and has prepared for it. The boundary markers on this property were set by the county surveyor in 1867 and have been verified twice since, she said. "I have the documents in the house. You are welcome to wait while I fetch them." "That will not be necessary," Drum said, with the air of someone making a generous concession. "My surveyor just needs to take some measurements." "Not on my land without a county order," Fannie said. "You are welcome to apply for one. The county land office in Brixton handles those requests. They take about 2 weeks to process." Drum's face reddened. Roscoe was standing to Fannie's right, close enough to make the position clear without saying anything about it. Dell was behind them near the barn, watching. The surveyor was looking at his boots with the expression of a man who had not been told this job would involve confrontation and was reconsidering his professional choices. "Mrs. Langley," Drum said, with a false reasonableness that was like a bad actor attempting a familiar role. "This could be handled simply and neighborly if you would just allow." "I have told you what the process is," Fannie said. "I have also told you twice in the last 2 years that the north section is not for sale, and I am telling you again now. Nothing about that position has changed. If you have legal business with this property, take it through the proper channels and I will respond accordingly. Good morning, Mr. Drum." She turned and walked back toward the house, unhurried, not waiting to see what Drum did with his face. Roscoe held his position at the gate until Drum turned his horse and rode back with his surveyor in tow, and then he followed her inside. She was at the kitchen table and her hands were flat on the surface and very still, which he understood was how she managed the shaking she was not going to let show to anyone outside this room. "You were extraordinary," he said. She let out a breath. "I was terrified," she said. "I know," he said. "You were extraordinary anyway." She looked up at him, and the combination of the residual adrenaline and the admission and his words, and the way he was looking at her, apparently crossed some threshold she had been holding, because she reached up and took hold of the front of his shirt with both hands and held on. He stood still and let her, and after a moment he put both arms around her carefully, and she let her forehead fall against his chest. They stood like that for a count of seconds that felt much longer, and then she straightened and let go of his shirt and stepped back and pushed her hair away from her face with a businesslike air that did not quite conceal the fact that her eyes were bright. "I need to ride into Brixton and speak to the county land office," she said. "I want it on record that Drum tried to access the property without authorization." "I will ride with you," he said. She looked at him for a moment and something settled in her expression. "Yes," she said. "All right." They rode to Brixton together, 6 miles on a bright October morning, and he thought there was something very fine about riding beside her. The way she sat a horse, the way she navigated the land with familiarity and ease, the way she nodded at the people they passed on the road with the confident acknowledgement of someone who belongs to a place and knows everyone in it. Several of those people looked at Roscoe with curiosity that was not unfriendly, and he understood that his presence at the Langley ranch had been noted and discussed in the town, as things were in small places where the social geography was well established. The county land office was a small and dusty building staffed by a bespectacled man named Howard Pierce, who greeted Fannie with professional warmth and listened to her account of Drum's morning visit with the focused attention of a man who knew both parties well. He noted everything she said, confirmed that no county survey order had been issued for the Langley North section, and told her he would make a formal note of the attempted access in the land records. "It is not actionable in itself," he said, "but it is a matter of record, and records have a way of being useful later on." "That is what I thought," Fannie said, and thanked him, and they walked back out into the bright October street. Brixton was a town of modest ambition, a main street of wood-fronted businesses, a church, a 2-room schoolhouse where Tommy attended, a saloon that was quieter than most and apparently regulated with a firm hand by its owner, a woman named Berta Malone whom Fannie greeted on the street with warm familiarity. There was also a general store, a livery, a telegraph office, and a small building that served as both the doctor's office and the barber shop on alternating days, an arrangement that Roscoe thought said something about frontier efficiency. Fannie stopped at the general store for supplies, and Roscoe helped carry them, and in the easy domesticity of the errand, he became aware of a specific and uncomplicated happiness that he had not experienced very often in his adult life. The happiness of being useful and present in the life of someone who mattered to him. He thought about this all the way home, riding beside her in the October light. That evening after supper, with Tommy doing his school reading at the table and Dell and Clara having their own quiet evening at the back of the house, Fannie sat down beside him on the porch bench, not in the chair, but the bench, which meant she was close enough that their arms were nearly touching in the cool air, and she said, "What are you thinking about?" "Today," he said. "All of it. Good things or troublesome things." "All good," he said. He hesitated, then said, "Fannie, I need to say something to you, and I need to say it directly." She turned to look at him with that clear and unhurried gaze. "I love this place," he said. "I love the work of it and the land and the way the sky does what it does every evening over that rise. I love Tommy and his horse named Biscuit and his pictures on the wall. I love watching you run this operation and argue with county officials and face down Sela's drum and read your novels in the evening like they are a guilty pleasure when they are clearly not guilty at all." He paused. "And I love you. I did not expect to. I came here to buy cattle and I ended up not being able to leave, and now I understand why, and I want you to know what it is." She was very still beside him. "I am not saying it to pressure you into anything," he said. "I am saying it because you asked me once to say the specific thing, and I have been working up to this one for a while." "Roscoe," she said. "Yes, "I have been in love with you since that second evening on the porch," she said, in a voice that was steady and honest and entirely characteristic. "When you told me you had not known where your roots belonged, I thought, I know that feeling, and I know what the end of it looks like, and I am looking at it right now." The porch was very quiet. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote voiced something distant and unconcerned. The lamp between them made a small circle of warm light in all the October dark. He reached over and took her hand. She laced her fingers through his and held on. They stayed like that for a long time, not saying anything else, because everything that needed saying had been said. November came, and with it, the formalities that the situation seemed to call for. Roscoe rode to Brixton and called on Reverend Thomas Fields, who ran the church and served as something of a civic anchor in the community, not to ask about wedding ceremonies yet, but to make himself known in the official way, to introduce himself as a man intending to stay, with serious intentions toward Fannie Langley, which was the kind of thing that needed to be done in a community like Brixton if you wanted to be taken seriously rather than regarded as a transient. Reverend Fields was a lean man of 60 with kind eyes and the economy of language that comes from years of dealing with people at the extremes of experience: births, deaths, conflicts, reconciliations. He listened to Roscoe with full attention, asked 3 questions that were pointed and reasonable, and at the end shook his hand and said, "Mrs. Langley is a good woman who has earned every good thing that comes to her. You seem like the right kind of steady, Mr. Maddox. I hope you are." "I intend to be," Roscoe said. He also wrote to Gerald Holt, explaining the situation plainly. Holt wrote back within 2 weeks with a letter that was short and warm and concluded with the line, "I always thought you needed something worth staying for, and I hope to God you found it. I will find another man for the trading work. You were the best I had, but this sounds better." The question of his contribution to the Langley ranch needed to be addressed practically as well. He had savings, 6 years of wages, relatively modest but consistent, amounting to a sum that was not trivial. He had an honest conversation with Fannie about finances, which was a conversation that required trust and a lack of performance on both sides, and she engaged with it with the same directness she brought to everything. She told him the full financial picture of the ranch, the debt that was manageable, the plans for expansion that were possible, the things she had deferred because the capital was not there. He told her what he had. They looked at it together on the kitchen table with her ledgers open between them, and what emerged was not a rescue or a takeover but a partnership, the kind that looks at 2 things and says, "These together are better than either alone." The cattle sale money had given the ranch breathing room for 2 years. His savings could fund the repair of the barn's east wall, which had been worrying Dell since spring, and purchase 4 additional breeding heifers to grow the herd toward the size Fannie had been working toward. It was not a dramatic transformation. It was the quiet and practical improvement that comes from 2 careful people combining their resources with intention. December arrived cool and clear, and on the 15th of the month, a Saturday, so Tommy had no school, Roscoe asked Fannie to marry him. He did it in the kitchen, without theatrical staging, early in the morning while the coffee was brewing and the light was coming in at a low winter angle through the window and laying its clean lines across the floor. He simply turned to her from where he was standing near the stove and said, "I would like you to be my wife. I would like to stay here and build this with you for the rest of my life. I would like to be a father to Tommy, not in replacement of his father, but alongside his memory. I would like to wake up here every morning and go to sleep here every night and have that be what my life is." She looked at him with her eyes very bright and said, "Yes, absolutely yes." And then she said, "The coffee is going to boil over," and he turned to take the pot off the heat, and when he turned back she was laughing, and he started laughing too, and it was one of those moments that does not announce itself as a landmark but that you know, even while you are in it, that you will carry it your whole life. They married in February of 1884 in the Brixton church, On a cold and bright day when the sky was an intense winter blue and the ground was hard with frost. Reverend Fields officiated. Dell and Clara were present, Clara in her best dress and Dell in a shirt that appeared to have been pressed with significant effort. Tommy stood at Roscoe's side, straight and serious, and clearly working very hard not to show how pleased he was, which made him look so much like his mother that Roscoe had to look at the floor for a moment to collect himself. Berta Malone from the saloon came with her husband. Howard Pierce from the land office came. Several neighboring ranchers and their families came, people who had known Fannie since she arrived in Texas as a young bride, and had watched her hold this land together through loss and drought, and the quiet hostility of Sela's drum. They came to welcome Roscoe into the community with the cautious warmth of people who had already decided, on the basis of what they had observed over the past several months, that he was all right. Fannie wore a dress the color of pale cream that she had made herself with Clara's help, and she walked down the short aisle of the church toward him with her chin level and her eyes on his face, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life, and he told her so afterward, and she said, "The dress took 6 weeks," which he found extremely characteristic. They exchanged vows in the plain and honest way that suited them both, without excessive ceremony, and when he put the ring on her finger, a simple gold band, not elaborate but good and solid, she looked down at it for a moment, and then up at him with an expression that he would spend years trying to properly describe and never quite manage. The wedding supper was held at the Langley ranch house, which Clara and 2 other women from Brixton had spent 2 days preparing for. There was more food than Roscoe had seen assembled in one place outside of a cattle town restaurant, and a great deal of warmth and noise and laughter, and at some point Tommy, who had been hovering at the edge of the adult conversations with an expression of elaborate casualness, sat down next to Roscoe and said, "I think this is a good thing that happened." "I agree with you completely," Roscoe said. "I'm going to call you Roscoe," Tommy said. "Not Pa, I had a pa, but Roscoe is good." "Roscoe is exactly what I want you to call me," Roscoe said. "Always." Tommy nodded with the satisfaction of someone who has resolved a logistical matter that has been occupying him, and went to get more pie. Fannie appeared beside Roscoe and looked at her son across the room and then at her husband, the word still new enough to be remarkable, and said quietly, "He loves you. He will not say it in those words for another year or 2 because he is 12 and it would embarrass him." "I know," Roscoe said. "I love him too. Same policy about the words." She laughed, the full real laugh that he had been collecting since the first time he heard it, and leaned against his arm, and he put his arm around her, and they stood together in the warm, crowded room and watched the evening unfold around them. Sela's Drum's land survey maneuver was resolved that same winter, when Fannie applied to the county for an official boundary verification as a preemptive measure, and the county surveyor confirmed what she had said. The boundary markers were correct, and the north section was exactly as described in the original homestead documents. Drum filed a formal challenge, and it was dismissed within 3 weeks. He sold his east pasture the following spring to a family named Alcott who were, by all accounts, considerably better neighbors. His ambitions about the spring on the north section died with his land ownership in the area, which Fannie noted in her ledger with a neat single line, and then closed the book on the matter permanently. The spring of 1884 was wet enough to break the recent dry pattern, and the grass came in thick and green across the Langley, now also Maddox range. The additional breeding heifers Roscoe had purchased were integrated into the herd without incident. Dell's knee improved with the addition of a younger hand named Pete Alcott, the eldest son of the new neighbors, who turned out to be a quick learner and a genuinely good hand with cattle. The east wall of the barn was repaired properly, which Dell noted with the satisfaction of someone who has been pointing out a problem for 2 years. Fannie discovered she was pregnant in April. She told Roscoe on a morning when the kitchen was full of spring light and the smell of the coffee and the bread Clara had been baking, and she told him with the same directness she brought to everything, watching his face for his reaction with her clear and honest eyes. His reaction was to stand very still for a moment, and then to cross the kitchen and take her face in both hands and press his forehead to hers, and he could not say anything for a moment because the feeling was too large for the words he had available. When he found his voice, it was not what he might have planned to say if he had planned anything. He said, "I did not know I could feel this lucky." She laughed and said, "You should feel lucky. I am excellent at this." He kissed her forehead and her cheek and the corner of her mouth, and she laughed again, and said there was bread to check on, which was so exactly Fannie that he loved her even more in that moment than he had any of the moments before. Tommy received the news of the expected baby with a contemplative silence that lasted approximately 4 minutes, and then resolved into a series of practical questions about logistics and timing that were so reminiscent of his mother that both Roscoe and Fannie had to control their expressions. When the practical questions were exhausted, Tommy said, "I think a brother would be useful," with the air of someone offering an administrative preference to the relevant authority. "We will see what God and nature decide," Fannie said. "I am just noting a preference," Tommy said, and went back to his breakfast. The summer of 1884 was the fullest that ranch had seen in years. The herd grew. The new fence on the north section held against everything the season could offer. Pete Alcott proved himself thoroughly competent, and Dell trained him with the methodical patience of someone passing on knowledge that took decades to accumulate. Roscoe's days were full and purposeful in a way that 6 months earlier he had not known he was capable of, having spent too many years in motion to have experienced what it felt like to be completely, actively, usefully still. He and Fannie worked side by side through the long summer days, and they fought sometimes about methodology, about timing, about the best approach to a problem with the well casing, about whether Tommy needed to spend more time at his school books and less time with Biscuit. And the fights were direct and honest and resolved cleanly, the way arguments between two people who respect each other tend to go, without the slow poison of things unsaid. He loved fighting with her. He would not have said this to her face because it would have sounded peculiar, but the truth was that her directness, even when aimed at him with a sharpness that required him to think carefully about his responses, was one of the things he valued most. She was incapable of the kind of drawn-out coldness that some people deployed as a weapon. She said what she thought, heard what he said in return, and moved forward. He tried to match her. On a Friday evening in late August, sitting on the porch with the sky doing its end-of-day magnificence and Fannie's hand in his and her belly visible now with the 4 months of growing life in it, he said, "Tell me something about yourself I do not know yet." She thought about it. "When I was 9 years old in Illinois," she said, "I convinced my little brother that the creek behind the house was actually a river, and that if you followed it far enough you would reach the Mississippi. We walked for most of a day before a neighbor found us and brought us home. Did you believe it yourself?" he asked. "At the time, yes, completely." She paused. "I think I have always wanted things to be bigger than they appear. I wanted the creek to be a river. I wanted this flat, dry land to be worth everything Robert's family had put into it, and it was. And now," he said. She looked at him and squeezed his hand. "Now I think I finally have all the size I need right here," she said. "I do not need anything to be bigger than it is." He brought her hand up and pressed it to his lips, and she made a small sound of contentment and leaned her head against his shoulder, and they watched the sun go all the way down. Their son was born in November of 1884, on a cold night when the wind came off the North Flat with a purpose that rattled the window glass and made the lamp flames bend. Clara helped with the birth, along with the doctor from Brixton, who had been summoned in the afternoon when it became clear the time was close. Roscoe spent 4 of the most anxious hours of his life in the kitchen, being given tasks by Clara, with the tactical wisdom of a woman who understands that keeping a man busy is a mercy during such moments. When the doctor came out and told him it was a boy and that Fannie was tired but well, Roscoe sat down at the kitchen table and put his face in his hands and stayed there for a long moment, not from sorrow but from the sheer pressure of the relief and the gratitude and the enormity of it. Tommy, who had been awake and sitting at the table the whole time with a book he had not actually been reading, said quietly, "Is Ma all right?" "She is perfect," Roscoe said. Tommy let out a long breath and looked back at the book that he was not reading. When Roscoe was allowed to go in, Fannie was propped against the pillows with the baby in her arms, looking exhausted and radiant in the way of a person who has just accomplished something significant and knows it. The baby was red-faced and dark-haired and appeared to have strong opinions about his new circumstances, which Roscoe thought was genetically inevitable. "He is perfect," Roscoe said. "He is very loud," Fannie said, and the exhausted love in her voice made his chest ache with the sweetness of it. "Tommy asked about you," he said. "He has been sitting in the kitchen all night." "Let him come in," she said. Tommy came and stood at the side of the bed with his serious face, looking at the baby with an expression that moved through assessment and arrived at something much tenderer. "He is small," he said. "He was larger than I would have preferred," Fannie said with dry precision, and Roscoe covered a laugh. "What is his name?" Tommy asked. They had discussed this and agreed. "Daniel Robert Maddox," Roscoe said. "Daniel for no particular reason except that we liked it. Robert for your father." Tommy looked up from the baby, and something moved across his face that was too large for 12 years and 12 nights of sitting up worrying, and all the years before that. He swallowed and nodded once and said, "That is a good name," in a voice that was entirely steady. Then he looked back at the baby and said, "I will teach him how to ride." "Plenty of time for that," Fannie said. "Biscuit will be gentle with him," Tommy said, with the firmness of someone making a contractual commitment on behalf of a horse. Roscoe looked at his wife and his son and his stepson in the lamplight of the bedroom on that cold November night with the wind at the window, and he thought of the morning he had ridden up to this ranch to buy cattle, 3 days on horseback from Amarillo, a simple job with a clear purpose and a clear end, and he thought of how completely and marvelously wrong the ending had been from anything he expected. He had come to buy cattle. She had sold them, efficiently, and at a price she had negotiated with absolute composure, and he had handed over the money and written the bill of sale, and the deal had been clean and complete. And then he had sat on her porch in the evening and talked about the sky and about roots and loneliness, and something had happened to him that simple arithmetic could not account for. He had gotten on his horse and ridden north with the cattle and arrived at Holt's ranch and done everything correctly, and then he had turned copper south again before he could think too hard about why, and he had ridden back to her. He was glad with every particle of himself that he had. The years that followed settled into the shape of a life that was full and sometimes hard and always, in the deep way that matters, good. The ranch grew steadily under the combined management of Fannie and Roscoe, who complemented each other with the precision of 2 tools designed for different tasks that happened to work perfectly in sequence. Fannie's methodical record-keeping and her instinct for the breeding herd, combined with Roscoe's experience in the cattle trading market and his connections in the Amarillo and Panhandle region, built the operation into one of the more respected small ranches in that part of the Panhandle. The railroad came through 42 miles east of Brixton in 1886, exactly as Fannie had predicted based on the survey information she had requested years before, and the effect on cattle movement and prices was exactly as she had analyzed: shorter drives, less loss, better prices for well-managed herds. The Langley Maddox herd was positioned well for it because Fannie had been managing toward that outcome for 3 years. Tommy grew up with the land in his blood the way his mother had always said it was, and by the time he was 16, he was a working cowhand of genuine ability, reading cattle and terrain with the instinctive fluency of someone born to it. He was tall and had his mother's directness and his father's, Robert's, dark eyes, and he treated Roscoe with a respect and ease that had, somewhere along the way, without announcement, become love. the kind that does not need the word because it is present in everything else. Daniel grew fat and loud and cheerful through his first year, graduated to a determined mobility that made the kitchen a constant exercise in vigilance, and by the time he was 2 had decided that Biscuit the quarter horse was the great love of his life, which Tommy encouraged with the proprietary satisfaction of someone whose prediction has been vindicated. In the spring of 1887, Fannie told Roscoe that they would be having another child. He responded with the same expression as the first time, still, and then overwhelmed, and then unable to say the right thing because the right thing was too big. She laughed and said he was reliably terrible at receiving this particular news in an articulate way, and he said that he thought that was all right, and she said she supposed it was. Their daughter arrived in October of 1887, dark-haired, loud, and with a quality of focused attention in her eyes from her very first days that made Fannie say, "She is going to be a great deal of work in the best possible way," which Roscoe understood immediately. They named her Clara Frances for Fannie, and Clara because Clara Pryor had been so present and essential to this family that to name a daughter anything else would have been a failure of gratitude. Clara herself cried for approximately 20 minutes when told, which was entirely out of character, and which Dell later claimed he had not witnessed despite being in the same room. Dell's knee improved and then declined and then improved again, as knees do, and he remained the steady anchor of the ranch operations through all of it, training Pete Alcott and later a second young hand with the same methodical patience. He was, by any definition, family. The spring of 1888 brought Tommy's 15th birthday, and a request from him that he be allowed to ride with a cattle drive to the railhead the following fall. It was a reasonable request from a boy who was nearly a man and who had the skills to justify it. Roscoe and Fannie discussed it thoroughly and agreed, and Tommy received the news with the careful composure of someone who has been hoping for it for a long time and does not want to appear undignified in relief. He then went to the barn and could be heard talking to Biscuit for approximately half an hour. One evening in the summer of 1888, 5 years after Roscoe had first ridden up to the Langley ranch gate on his roan gelding with a professional mandate and no personal expectations whatsoever, he and Fannie sat on the porch in the warm late evening with their coffee. Daniel was asleep inside. Clara was asleep. Tommy was in the bunkhouse with Pete and the hands, having been deemed old enough for that arrangement, which he had received with the satisfaction of a social promotion well earned. The sky was doing what it always did, pulling out its full vocabulary of gold and pink and deep orange, and laying it across the flat horizon with extravagant generosity, as if it was putting on this particular performance just for them. "Do you remember what you said when you came back?" Fannie asked. "That first time you rode south again after delivering the cattle." "I said I did not want to leave," he said. "That was the first time I said it. I had been not wanting to leave for several days before that." "From the second evening on the porch," she said. "Earlier than that," he said. "Possibly from the moment you told me I was riding across your best grazing grass." She made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something more tender. "You rode 3 days to tell me you did not want to leave." "Best ride I ever made," he said. She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her, and they watched the sky do its work in the long quiet of the summer evening, and the ranch spread out before them in the golden light. The fence lines good and true, the herd moving in the far pasture, the kitchen garden busy along the south wall, the barn solid with its repaired east wall, the sound of Daniel turning over in his sleep coming faintly through the open window. Everything that mattered was here. Everything that had been unresolved and moving and rootless in him had settled, not through resignation but through choice. The choice he had made every day since he turned copper south from Amarillo. The choice he continued to make and would continue to make, without question, without doubt, without the smallest wish to be anywhere else. He thought of what Fannie had said to him on the evening of the fence repair, sitting close on the porch bench with her hand in his, the first time she had told him that she loved him. She had said she knew what the end of loneliness looked like, and she was looking at it. He understood her completely. "Fannie," he said. "Yes," she said, without lifting her head from his shoulder. "Thank you for selling me those cattle." She laughed, the full real laugh, sudden and warm, and then she tilted her head up to look at him, and her eyes were bright and soft and full of the kind of happiness that does not perform itself but simply exists, steady as good land, as deep as good water. "Thank you for coming to buy them," she said. The sky went on doing its extravagant work above the Texas panhandle, and the evening settled gently over the ranch. And the Maddox family, Fannie and Roscoe and Tommy and Daniel and Francis, Clara and Dell and Clara, and the whole good working world of that place, continued on into a future that was not perfect, because nothing is, but was full and true and thoroughly, completely, irreversibly theirs.